Hello, my name is Victoria Dickerson, and this is my paper, The Politics of Heritage, UNESCO and the War in Yemen. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, known as UNESCO, was established in 1945 as a multilateral organization to promote global peace and create a better world through the promotion of education, science and culture. The preamble to its constitution outlines a founding philosophy which is rooted in humanist principles and drives its international outlook. Since inception, UNESCO has sought to rise above politics to bring nations and experts together for the benefit of mankind. Considered one of the world's foremost cultural organisations, UNESCO's 1954 Hague Convention provided a framework for the protection of cultural property in conflict, and since 1972, its World Heritage Convention has inscribed over 1,000 sites on its list of World Heritage. Despite the protection offered to cultural property by these international humanitarian laws, heritage sites still continue to suffer from the ravages of war and conflict. One such casualty is the Republic of Yemen, located on the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula and home to a unique cultural heritage, from megalithic monuments, Bronze Age and hilltop settlements, to towns filled with unique Islamic architecture. Its landscapes span deserts, valleys, coasts and mountain ranges. Recognising the value of Yemen's diverse history and heritage, UNESCO has inscribed 4 properties on its World Heritage List: the town of Zabid, the old city of Sana'a, the walled city of Shabam and the Socotra archipelago, and there are a further 10 sites on its tentative list. Since 2014, Yemen has been embroiled in a brutal civil war. In January 2015, Shiite Houthi insurgents forced the resignation of President al-Hadi and his Sunni-dominated government when they captured the presidential palace in the capital city of Sana'a. Following his resignation, Hadi turned to Saudi Arabia to help regain control of the country, and since March 2015, a Saudi-led coalition of Sunni-majority states comprised of Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, Qatar, Sudan and the UAE have launched a campaign of airstrikes against the Iranian-backed Houthi insurgents known as Operation Decisive Storm. As the civil war has progressed, territorial control has shifted between a multitude of actors, from terrorist organisations such as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, through to transitional councils, Houthi insurgents, collections of tribal party leaders and members of the coalition. Alongside the vast humanitarian crisis this has caused, it has also seen the wholesale destruction of Yemeni cultural heritage, including sites on UNESCO's World Heritage and tentative lists. Much of this damage has been caused by targeted coalition airstrikes and the deliberate destruction by terrorist organisations. In November 2018, the United Nations reported that coalition airstrikes had damaged or destroyed at least 32 sites, all of which should be protected under international humanitarian law. Using the ongoing war in Yemen as a case study, this paper, whilst not seeking to minimise or ignore the humanitarian consequences of the war, will draw attention to UNESCO's failure to protect sites inscribed on its World Heritage List. It will demonstrate that in maintaining its apolitical stance and sidestepping contentious issues, such as the potentially political nature of heritage construction and destruction, UNESCO has not just failed to protect its inscribed properties, but to hold the perpetrators to account. The preamble to UNESCO's 1945 founding constitution captures not just the organisation's humanist principles, but a moral idealism which sought to create international norms or standards of appropriate behaviour. UNESCO focuses on heritage in an international context as part of a world's culture, although taking this internationalist approach often neglects to consider the historic role of heritage in building nation states and developing powerful national cultures and identities. The attempt to create international heritage in a world's culture is often challenged by different cultural understandings of what heritage is and to who that heritage belongs. Considering heritage as a contemporary product shaped from history, as proposed by John Tunbridge and Gregory Ashworth, its potential present-day use as a tool of power becomes clear. Fundamental to the construction of national identity and culture, Rosie Bashir argues heritage in a geopolitical context becomes a way that the past can be controlled and presented to meet the needs of the present and shape the future. Heritage sites during war can become a disputed symbol of a nation's power, their destruction representing military, political and ideological might. UNESCO's apolitical and international approach to the protection of World Heritage in conflict zones seeks to deny this. To avoid the mass heritage destruction seen during World War II, in 1954, the Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict was adopted by UNESCO. Known as the 1954 Hague Convention, this multilateral agreement between states parties outlined their obligations to preserve and protect cultural heritage during conflict. In 1972, UNESCO created the World Heritage Convention, overseen by the World Heritage Committee, comprised of representatives from states parties. The Convention, through the committee, aims to identify and protect natural and cultural heritage around the world deemed to be of outstanding universal value and inscribe it on their list of World Heritage Sites. The shortcomings of both conventions have been highlighted, from the military necessity exception in the Hague Convention, which provides a loophole allowing cultural heritage to be used, damaged or destroyed during conflict, to the wider lack of legal enforcement and systems of control. Both conventions place a responsibility on individual nations to implement and adhere to them, with UNESCO only able to encourage diplomatically. As Lynn Meskel suggests, this often allows only the very lowest level of ambition to prevail. Over the past 20 years, UNESCO has faced increasing criticism, from the processes leading to inscription on the World Heritage List to the composition of the World Heritage Committee. Attention has been drawn to its overly bureaucratic nature, the influence of geopolitics on decision-making processes, and the dominance of Western-centric concepts of culture and heritage. However, recent empirical studies suggest the balance of power within the World Heritage Committee is undergoing a shift that has seen a move away from the traditional dominance of Western states. Reflecting a broader trend towards greater multipolarity seen on other international platforms, new and emerging nations are beginning to wield greater influence and form political alliances. Studies suggest emerging nations are increasingly using these platforms to pursue strategic national interests, often aligning with and supporting nations they have trade or aid links to. The extent to which geopolitics has affected UNESCO is more difficult to determine, as World Heritage Committee decisions are often made through consensus and negotiation between members, rather than through documented voting procedures. The informality and lack of transparency in these processes allow the politics behind decisions to remain hidden. Rather than uniting nations and protecting heritage for the benefit of mankind, it's resulted in division and factionalism. Lynn Meskel's in-depth analysis of UNESCO responses to World Heritage destruction in conflict zones has highlighted the often politicised and confrontational nature of committee discussions and decisions, arguing that the increased multipolarity found within UNESCO has contributed to its failure to protect cultural heritage despite the legal protection offered by its conventions. In prioritising internal unity, Meskel argues that UNESCO has placed contentious issues in suspense, resulting in a form of institutional gridlock, retreating behind its formalism to focus more on awareness raising and technocratic functionality, generating volumes of reports, guidelines, decisions and press releases. Reflecting a wider discourse found in the media, UNESCO contextualises the destruction in terms of the loss of cultural and civilisational heritage and fails to address the politics behind the destruction. Although outspoken when heritage destruction is committed by organisations such as Islamic State and keen to pursue action as seen in Mali, UNESCO's response to the destruction when caused by powerful states parties is often more muted. This lack of censure, according to Meskel and Laima Khalidi, highlights the impotence of UNESCO as a multilateral institution, whether failing to address previous imbalances of power that privilege Western dominance, or recognising the utility of its international platform to help maintain wider geopolitical alliances, UNESCO has failed to acknowledge the politics and political power inherent in national heritage. Rather than protecting heritage sites in conflict zones, it has placed idealism and an idealistic concept of heritage over the reality of its potential use, retreating behind formalism and bureaucracy. The protection afforded to cultural heritage by UNESCO's conventions are dependent on the actions of individual states, and the organisation lacks the ability to enforce compliance. Reduced to generating awareness campaigns and issuing press releases, all noticeably apolitical, it has attempted to sidestep controversial issues, and in doing so has tacitly acknowledged the political dimension of heritage whilst maintaining the facade of political neutrality. In February 2015, Iranian-backed Shiite Houthi insurgents, also known as Ansar Allah, ousted the Saudi Arabian-backed Sunni-dominated government of al-Hadi and captured the presidential palace in the capital city of Sana'a. In response to Hadi's plea for assistance, a Saudi-led coalition of Gulf states launched a campaign of airstrikes against the Houthi insurgents, known as Operation Decisive Storm. Wider support was provided to the coalition by the US, UK, and France, either through intelligence and logistical support or via government-authorised arms exports and trade contracts worth billions of pounds. The Saudis justified their intervention by arguing that instability within Yemen posed a threat to themselves, the region, and the wider world. For the Saudis, the collapse of Yemen would potentially allow a terrorist-run state to emerge on their southern border, further arguing Iranian support for the Houthi insurgents would destabilise the wider Gulf area. Regional dominance has long been a closely contested issue between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with both vying to create spheres of influence and attract international allies. The sectarian dimension of the war has seen many commentators suggest that Yemen has become the site of a proxy war between the two states, replicating the Cold War experiences of northern and southern Yemen. Geopolitical interest in Yemen is intrinsically linked to its location and strategic importance as an intersection between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa. Key to this is the 19-mile wide Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the most critical and strategic waterways in the world, a major artery of globalization connecting Europe to the Indian Ocean and Eastern Africa. The war in Yemen is mired in a complex web of international relations and geopolitics, reflecting not just the international shift towards greater multipolarity, but the link between national and international politics, policies, finance, and trade. It's against this political backdrop that Yemeni cultural heritage has been destroyed during the civil war. From archaeological sites, museums, churches, tombs, and monuments, very little has escaped unscathed. Despite UNESCO's Gulf Cooperation Council providing all coalition states with a list of 50 heritage sites and their coordinates, the coalition has so far been responsible for the total or partial destruction of 66 sites and terrorists for more than 25. Included in these, the 3 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Between March and September 2015, coalition strikes hit the old city of Sana'a and the historic city of Zabid. In June 2015, Islamic State damaged the Qubat al-Mahdi Mosque in Sana'a, and Al-Qaeda were responsible for damaging the old city of Shibam in 2016. Whilst all parties have been responsible for physical damage caused to cultural heritage sites, the scale and collateral damage caused by airstrikes has been vast in comparison to that of the insurgents and terrorist organisations. Layma Khalidi argues that in providing material assistance, Western nations and Iran are complicit in this destruction, their support ultimately serving to legitimise and normalise heritage destruction by select powerful actors. These powerful actors are all aware of their responsibilities under international law, with the majority having ratified both the Hague and World Heritage Conventions. If, as Rosie Bashir has suggested, heritage in a geopolitical context can be used to meet the needs of the present and shape the future, then all parties involved are shaping or destroying Yemen's heritage to create a future that meets their cultural, political, economic, or ideological needs. Responding to growing reports of airstrikes on the old city of Sana'a, on the 12th of May, UNESCO's reaction was one of the first of many published on their news section of their website. Analysing the text of these illuminates just how carefully UNESCO framed their response. As you can see highlighted, there is a direct link between the bombing and damage. However, there is no mention of those responsible for dropping the bombs. Irina Bakova's statement highlights that the airstrikes are responsible, yet rather than drawing attention to the state's parties behind the bombing, she calls for all parties to refrain from heritage destruction, emphasising their obligations under the Hague and World Heritage Conventions. Whilst comfortable condemning the actions, she appears reluctant to name and condemn the actors. Examining Bakova's response to Islamic State's destruction at Palmyra, another UNESCO World Heritage Site, highlights the disparity in language when addressing the actions of states and non-states parties. Issued just 3 months after her first response to the Yemeni conflict, As you can see from the sections highlighted, there is a stark difference in language and tone. Although equally applicable to Yemen, nowhere does UNESCO or Bakova so firmly describe Yemeni destruction as a war crime or the situation as cultural cleansing. Unlike in Yemen, she appears more comfortable naming and condemning the non-state's actors. On the 13th of May, UNESCO's Office for the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council in Yemen, based in Qatar, unveiled their emergency response plan to safeguard Yemeni cultural heritage. Working alongside the Arab Regional Centre for World Heritage in Bahrain and ICROM's Arab Region Conservation Project in the UAE, efforts will be concentrated on assessments, technical assistance and monitoring. Although the full article repeats Bakova's statement from the previous day, reminding all parties of their obligations under international treaties, there is no mention of pursuing legal action or wider enforcement. As Lynn Meskel has highlighted, the irony of placing responsibility for oversight on Gulf-based institutions, all from countries involved in Operation Decisive Storm, appears to have been lost on UNESCO. On the 16th of July, UNESCO produced an emergency action plan to safeguard Yemen's cultural heritage. As this extract demonstrates, rather than addressing the actions of states parties and discussing enforcement of the conventions, a two-day meeting of technical experts was convened, supporting the accusation that UNESCO retreats behind formalism and bureaucracy when faced with contentious issues. In June and July 2015, UNESCO held their 39th annual World Heritage Committee meeting, which resulted in the Bonn Declaration on World Heritage, a response to the rise in cultural destruction in countries such as Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq and Yemen. Beginning by drawing attention to the previous statements, decisions and declarations, and reiterating UNESCO's commitment to the protection of cultural and natural heritage, it moves on to address the current threats to the world's heritage. As you can see from these articles taken from the declaration, the committee, like Bakova, were comfortable naming non-states parties responsible for heritage destruction, yet the wording of Article 20 suggests they shared her reticence in identifying the culprits in the case of Yemen. It's interesting to note that Qatar sat on the World Heritage Committee in this year and was one of the coalition states involved in Decisive Storm, yet the extent of Qatar's influence on the final declaration is difficult to ascertain due to the informal and often negotiated processes behind committee decisions. Despite the Bonn meeting generating volumes of text, they detail the outcomes of decisions rather than the processes leading to them. When taking this lack of transparency into account, it should come as no surprise that division and factionalism amongst states arises, or that, as Meskel suggests, meetings become confrontational and politicised. Also missing is any direct mention of the nations providing material support and assistance, just a reminder to all parties of their obligations as seen in Article 25. However, this article also hints at a possible reason: funding. Operating on a limited budget in relation to its size and scope, UNESCO is funded by assessed contributions from member states and supplemented by further voluntary contributions. The table on the left in US dollars demonstrates the figures involved, all of which are topped up by voluntary contributions. Since the US withdrew financial support from UNESCO in 2011, although UNESCO still publishes assessed figures, it has increasingly had to rely on voluntary contributions from other states to fund its programme of works. Not all states keep up to date with their payments, such as Iran has highlighted, who have failed to make a payment since September 2017. The complexity of the web Yemen's heritage finds itself tangled within is demonstrated by the figures on the right. The international government licensed arms trade is worth billions. Although the US, UK and France supply the most weaponry to the Saudis and coalition members, EU states are amongst the other main suppliers. Addressing the issue of UNESCO funding, Meskel proposes this may provide an explanation for their cautious approach to directly naming either the Saudis or other coalition partners. These oil-rich monarchies of the Arabian Peninsula have and continue to voluntarily contribute millions of dollars to UNESCO projects, including the continued protection of World Heritage sites in conflict. Not only have coalition sites spent billions of dollars destroying Yemeni cultural heritage through their voluntary contributions, they're now paying to restore what they destroyed. another irony which appears to be lost on UNESCO and its current Director General, Audrey Azoulay. Although UNESCO has undoubtedly demonstrated its success in areas such as education and science, when it comes to tangible cultural heritage, it is often let down by its internationalist and apolitical stance. As I hope this paper has demonstrated, in a global context, heritage construction and heritage destruction are inherently political, entangled in a complex web of international relations, geopolitics, and trade. In maintaining its facade of political neutrality, UNESCO seeks to deny this, placing adherence to the idealism of its founding philosophy over reality. In the case of Yemen, this means refusing to acknowledge how the country and wider Gulf region have been shaped by decades of geopolitics and sectarianism, often assisted by the wider international community. It has meant privileging the needs and wants of powerful states parties and their allies over smaller, less internationally powerful states, resulting in both humanitarian and cultural heritage destruction and devastation. UNESCO's failure to protect inscribed properties in Yemen and reluctance to hold the perpetrators to account should serve as a warning that we cannot or should not ignore the politics of heritage. Thank you for listening to my paper, and I look forward to discussing it with you at the symposium.